Good afternoon, and welcome to the Penn Alumni Weekend, special edition of the Penn Alumni Water Forum Speaker Spotlight. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joanne Spigonardo, Senior Advisor at the Water Center at Penn. Today's webinar will feature women in the water industry. We are grateful to our moderator and panelists that will participate today. Panelists will speak about their career paths in water and sustainability and how their time at Penn led them to where they are now. Our panelists include Dr. Vivian Bertrand-Furman, Assistant Director for External Partnerships, Princeton University's Adliger Center for Energy and the Environment, May Reed Helms, Senior Consultant, Amman Advisor, Kendra Morris, President and Northeast Region, Veolia North America. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, Diana Swidler, Managing Consultant, South Pole. Diana is a sustainability professional with an international profile and working experience in a variety of professional fields, including renewable energies operations, renewable energy research, especially solar energy and hydrogen, sustainable management, natural capital services. She works on implementation of sustainability strategies that enable the inclusion of environmental and social considerations in business operations. Diana is a graduate of the MS program of the University of Pennsylvania, class 2020. Diana will give a more in-depth overview of our discussion today, as well as full bios about our panelists, and begin the session now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joanna, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for attending Women in the Water Industry. I'm very excited to introduce today's speakers. They all have years of experience in water-related topics, but we also share something else in common. As Joanna pointed out, we were also students at UPenn, like many of the people that are listening to us now. And for this reason, we are taking this opportunity to explain how we arrive at this point in our careers, because we want to give you a sense of all the wall of possibilities you can get when you finish your degree. Can you go next, please? Okay, so I'm going to explain about what was my career path. So I graduated from the master's program in environmental studies at the beginning of the pandemic. So you can imagine how difficult it was to find a job back then. In this context, I decided to keep applying to jobs while I would volunteer with different organizations to gain more professional experience. The master's program opened my eyes about the endless horizon of possibilities to work in the climate and environmental space. So I decided that I was not ready to focus on one single topic. This is how I decided I will become a consultant, because a consultant has more of a general profile, working at high level in several different fields. And that was very attractive to me. This is why I volunteer as a pro bono consultant for different organizations. And thanks to that experience, I got an internship with South Pole. But my internship with South Pole was coming to an end. So I applied to different positions, even one internally at South Pole, but I was turned down. So that was disappointed, but finally I got an internship with the International Council for Clean Transportation, the ICCT. And the funny thing is that while I was doing this internship with ICCT, I was called by South Pole and offered me a position as a consultant. So I'm very happy currently with my job. In my day-to-day, I touch a wide range of topics, from broad carbon footprint to biodiversity and water assessments across the company supply chain. Well, that was my career journey to my position today, and I'm very curious about today's speakers' career paths too. I'm going to read the bios of each of them so the audience can understand better their backgrounds, and then I'm going to ask how they reach to the current positions nowadays. So our first speaker today is Dr. Vivian Furman. She has spent nearly 2 decades working on environmental initiatives at the intersection of science and policy. She earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Duke University, a master's degree in environmental studies from the University of Pennsylvania, and a certificate from the Araba Institute for Environmental Studies. Vivian completed her PhD in environmental risk and policy from Ben Gurion University in Israel, using risk assessment to determine the health and policy implications of emerging contaminants in the aquatic environment. As Director for Policy and Programs at the Product Stewardship Institute, Vivian worked on legislation and programs for safe disposal of leftover medications and other household waste streams. Today, Vivian is Assistant Director for External Partnerships at Princeton University Andlinger Center for Energy and Environment. In this role, she connects companies and other stakeholders with Princeton researchers working on clean tech, innovations, water energy nexus, decarbonization of the economy, and related policy. I'm sorry. Vivian is also on the board of several environmental organizations, including the Global Water Alliance, based in Philadelphia. Welcome, Vivian. Our second speaker is Moret Helms. She's a senior consultant with Main Advisors, a global management consultancy and advisory firm focused on the water industry. She works out of the US office in Philadelphia, but now she's joining us from Paris. And she has been with the firm for more than 2 years. In her tenure with Amain, she has consulted on over 20 projects across the water sector, advising a range of companies from industrial to commercial on market dynamics and how to strategically plan for the future. Outside of work, she has volunteered with the Global Water Alliance, the Water Center at Penn, and the Ocean Exchange. She holds a Master in Environmental Policy from the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Moret. And then our last speaker, but not the least, is Kendra Morris, President, Northeast Region of Veolia North America. So Kendra leads cross-functional teams to protect the public health of our communities and facilitate economic development through reliable water infrastructure. Kendra's background is in infrastructure investment in environmental, social, and transportation public-private partnerships. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Political Science and a Master of City Planning, both from the University of Pennsylvania. She lives in New Jersey with her 4 sons and husband. Welcome, Kendra. I'll turn it over to Vivian to get us started.
Thank you, Diana. You're a champ. You made it through all the bios. So hi, everyone. You guys can click to the next slide. I didn't actually do the assignment quite right because I was instructed to tell everybody a little bit about my trajectory since graduating from Penn, but I thought maybe I wasn't the only one that didn't have anything figured out in college. And so maybe that part of the story would also be helpful. So I'm going to back up and start in the year 2007, which feels like a lifetime ago now. But that's the year I graduated from Duke, from undergrad. And back in my day, there was no environmental policy major, which in hindsight seems nuts. But that was the story. I had a choice between hard science or political science. So I opted for political science with a focus on international relations. And I sort of cobbled together all of the environmental policy and environmental law and environmental science that was interesting to me, all that I could. Because ultimately I wanted to study, I knew this much, I wanted to study the systems that explained how society worked. So I thought poli-sci would give me that kind of top-down understanding from the country level. And so for my minor, I chose psychology to give me the bottom-up perspective from the individual, how the brain works. And after graduation, honestly, I did what a lot of other Duke students did, and I went to be a consultant in Washington, D.C. I was an environmental consultant because I knew that I cared about the environment. I just didn't know what my career would look like. And like many others on this call, consulting gave you sort of it was good for a generalist. And I worked on energy efficiency in commercial buildings. I actually implemented the Energy Star program. So if you guys have seen that little plaque on energy efficient appliances, I worked on the building part of that for EPA. So I helped companies join the program and benchmark their buildings. But honestly, it sounds good on paper, and there was a lot about it that I'm grateful for, but I didn't love it. Consulting wasn't for me, at least not at that firm. I really felt like a big round peg trying to cram myself into a small square hole, and it was a poor fit for me. But I am grateful for the experience because it did show me behind the scenes, both in the corporate world and the federal government clients that I was working with. But after freelancing in DC for another year or so, I moved on to my next chapter. I found a small program in the middle of literally nowhere. It looked like Mars in the desert in southern Israel called the Arava Institute. And that was both a peace building and coexistence living program for students, mostly from Israel, all the Arab nations, and North America. And you got to do undergraduate or graduate level environmental studies. So the idea is you all become friends and you build trust by studying these shared environmental issues that we all know don't respect political boundaries. And you eat together and you hike together and you dance together and you live together. And so you build this foundation of trust for the really intensive peace building work that comes after. And the hope is all those students will go off and become ministers of the environment in their respective countries and solve the Middle East crisis while they're at it. And while I was in Israel at that program where I got a certificate, two things happened. And well, the first is that I met a boy I liked, who I didn't know at the time would one day become my husband. And I'll explain why that matters later. But second, and more to the point, I got into Penn. I got into the MES program. So I left Israel and I went back to the US and got my degree really quickly in about a year and a half. And so I mentioned the boy I met in Israel to explain just why I was so highly motivated to finish quickly and get back to Israel. I had brought in credits that I was very lucky that Penn put towards my master's, which was helpful. And I overloaded with as many classes as I could, which was great. And I met a lecturer named Stan Laskowski, who became my mentor. And that was a really special part of Penn for me. He was really the one that awoke my passion for water issues, specifically for me, water management and water policy. And he brought me into the Global Water Alliance, which is a really great organization where I'm still a board member today. It's based in Philly. So after Penn, I went back to Israel. I joined with a team of hydrologists that were looking at the impacts of endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, in the aquatic environment. And I'm not a hydrologist, but they needed a lead on the policy side to take all the data that they got from measuring chemicals in the water and help them turn those measurements into actionable recommendations. So that was my job. I did a risk assessment of the human health impact of EDCs, mostly BPA, in the aquatic environment. And then I figured out what to recommend to governments in the entire region. And that was really fascinating because I had to wrestle with a lot of gaps in data and unknowns about human exposure to EDCs and mechanisms, and also with the political reality that almost 100% of water in Israel is recycled for potable use, but almost none in the Palestinian territories. And they all share land. So that was a really important, it was a wake-up call for everyone on the team regarding how science and policy interacts. And I had never done a human health risk assessment or used modeling software or studied EDCs or toxicology in general. And also nobody told me risk assessment is all math. So that was a really fun learning curve. But I was interested in the policy recommendations that came out of it. So that was really satisfying. And from there, I was hired by a nonprofit in Boston. So me and the boy moved back to the US. We moved to Boston. And I helped write policy and run programs to keep drugs out of the waterways, basically, and have them disposed properly. And there weren't many people doing that in our country. So at one point, I was the person in the US that knew the most about how to develop and run these drug take-back programs and how to bring together all the different partners that make that happen. And I got to write and help pass state policy to get drug makers to help fund those programs, which was a huge job. And I was ripe for burnout at that stage in my life, as I'm sure many of you can relate. But I'll say it was a membership-based organization, the nonprofit. So I got to practice some kind of sales, getting the state and local governments to join and support our work. And I started to find my niche. I realized I liked the niche between science and policy, and I liked the partnership aspects, the human relationship building aspects. So I worked at that nonprofit for about 4 years, and then I moved here to the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, where I started working at Princeton University. I was hired by the Anlinger Center for Energy and the Environment to run their external partnerships, which included a corporate membership program, which was pretty perfect given my experience. The mission of the center is to bring students, faculty, and all sorts of external partners like government and nonprofit together to find innovative but practical solutions, the ones that can actually come to be, to massive global environmental problems like climate change, like water scarcity. So I help cultivate and grow these relationships. And I help with knowledge transfer between academia and the real world to make sure Princeton's research isn't being done up in a vacuum in the ivory tower, but that it's actually informed by the problems and the people on the ground. And a huge part of my job is connecting companies to researchers on campus across every department with an eye to engineering, but it's very multidisciplinary and I love it. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Vivi, and such an amazing trajectory. I'm going to turn it over now to Moret.
Thank you. So compared to the other impressive speakers here, my career in water is very much in its infancy, although my interest in water has dated back 10 plus years. So I will mimic Vivian a little bit and give some background about my pre-Penn experience and kind of what built up to going to Penn, just a quick snippet, and then how I've progressed from there. So there was a bit of time in between when I was interested versus when I pursued, and that was because of a couple factors. So similar to actually most of everyone, I got my undergrad in political science, so common thread there. And the job I got after college was in healthcare, actually. So I'd interned all through the summers, and once you have a job after college, I had stayed there for a bit just to really wrestle with, is water my true passion? So I did seminars, conferences, and classes, and finally did the GRE. Convinced myself to, master's program was good, even though I was still paying off my undergrad loans. So I was particularly looking for part-time programs. When I applied to Penn, I was very happy that they had one, so I could work full-time while I went to class at night. And luckily, my company allowed that to happen. So the healthcare company was based in Boston, but they let me work remote full-time and moved to Philadelphia. So I was a pro at working remotely before the pandemic, and I was doling out some tips to my friends and family about how to do that. So I had it down. But yeah, so then I went to Penn from 2016 to 2019. And graduated with a master's in environmental policy with a focus of water. And I really wanted to find a job after graduating that used all of the skills I learned. The master's program had only encouraged my love for water and my desire to find a job in it. And I had also fallen in love with Philadelphia itself. So I wanted to stay in Philadelphia, really use the water network that was around me, and find a job that could also, match my current salary. Water isn't the most lucrative career, but is something I'm passionate about. So, I applied to different things and had gone on the Penn job board, had started networking with people at the Water Center, and had gone to more conferences like the Mazars Women in Water, volunteered, and really tried to put myself out there as much as possible, and stumbled across Amman on the Penn jobs board. I applied, and then there were crickets. And I was like, okay, well, I really liked their mission. I really liked what they were offering as a company. So I actually reached out to Meg Kramer, now Meg Maffett, through LinkedIn, because I saw she was connected to my partner, the partner at my company, Bill Malarkey. So she was very gracious and wrote a wonderful letter of recommendation for me. And that's how I got my foot in the door, because also my background had been in healthcare for work, even though it was 6+ years of working experience. A lot of environmental companies are looking for people who have done more internships and more involved. So it was a bit hard to get my foot in the door. So very grateful that Meg did that for me. And I was accepted after some rounds of interviews. And now I have been at Amman for more than 2 years. And for those that don't know, Amman Advisors is a we're now an environmental consulting company. We were solely focused on water, but we've had expanded to resource recovery, both with energy as well. So with that, we do M&A scans, we do market intelligence, we do innovation research, and I am constantly learning at this job. It's like a mini class, each project that lasts about 3 to 6 weeks on average. So I am constantly learning. I'm doing all sorts of tasks, interviewing people, building slides, building Excel models, meeting with clients, going on site to learn about different water technologies. So it's really wonderful. And that's my trajectory.
Thank you, Maureen, for this amazing overview of your professional career. I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker, Kendra. The floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendra Morse. I am president of Veolia's Northeast Municipal Water Contract Operations. I live in New Jersey. I am a proud Penn alumni 2 times over. In 2005, I went to Penn, got my BA in International Relations, so in the School of Arts and Sciences. And International Relations was a great way for me to study multiple majors at once. It's a combination of economics, history, and political science. And when I graduated, didn't know what I wanted to do. I lived in Philadelphia for a while. I got very interested in city planning. And so I went back and I got my master's of city and regional planning, which is in the School of Design at Penn. And while I was in my master's program, I learned about iGel, which is where Joanne and I met many, many years ago. And so I interned at iGel. For those who don't know what iGel was, it was a combination, a collaboration space between business who had environmental priorities, environmental protection, conservation priorities, and Wharton, the School of Wharton and School of Business, and the MES program, any other department within the University of Pennsylvania that touched the environment. It was very, very interesting experience for me to be exposed to all of these companies that had some sort of environmental mission at the core of their business plan. And when I graduated from the Masters of City Planning, I realized what I really wanted to do was understand how we can fund improvements into public infrastructure projects. So that could be water infrastructure, pipes that are running underground, or drinking water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants where we're actually cleaning the water. Could also be roads, bridges, airports, public transportation. And I joined Meridian, which is an infrastructure fund. So they invest private equity into public infrastructure projects. So they're public-private partnerships, or P3s as we called them. So I worked with Meridian for 3 years. Had a great time learning, and I became particularly passionate about water infrastructure. So I had an opportunity to join American Water. So for those of you who live in Philly, American Water's headquarters are in Camden. If you ever go down to Penn's Landing, you can see them across the river. They are a regulated water utility. And at American Water, I really learned the water business, and I was doing business development for American Water for 3 years. Suez poached me from American Water. So I jumped over to another water company. This was a French global company that provided environmental services all around the globe. Could be water, like drinking water, wastewater, could be waste management, solid waste recycling. And then Veolia, where I currently work, bought Suez last year. And in the merger, this opportunity came up to apply for the president of the Northeast region. So they merged the 2 companies together. And I raised my hand. I went through the interview process. I got the job. And so for the last 9 months, I have been leading our operations team, which is essentially 900 people spread from Vermont down to Maryland. And we partner with 80 municipalities. So these are cities that own their own drinking water or wastewater infrastructure, the pipes and the treatment plants, but they know that they don't have the professional expertise to staff this. They don't have the people who understand really how to clean water. So that's where we come in, and we provide that professional expertise. So we staff all of these facilities. We're the ones out there in the street making repairs to pipes, making sure that water flows reliably and it's safe to your taps. And so it's a privilege to be here with you guys today. I love coming back to Penn and hearing the stories of other people who've gone through Penn and hearing the questions that current students have about how to get into the water industry.
Well, this is a very passionate subject. And it's so amazing how we became interested in the water space from very different angles. I would like to ask each of you, how can we better prepare students to become the next generation of water leaders? Maybe Vivian, you can start first.
Sure, big question, which I definitely won't be able to fully answer, but my kind of knee-jerk response was that I always benefited from context in my studies. So as opposed to diving really deep into the science or the software or the tools, I always like to zoom out a little bit and understand what was maybe contributing to, for example, water pollution or water scarcity, right? Is this in an area where there's political strife? Is this in an area of shared borders or riparian states that are fighting each other? For me, that was always more interesting than getting in the water and doing the testing myself to understand the levels. And I think that's probably reflected in the background that I shared, but I would say context really matters.
Great. Moret, what do you think? How we can prepare the next generation of water leaders?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things to do, and again, won't be covering all of them, but what I think is to look at water holistically. There are so many things that it touches in different businesses, there's different types of water companies itself. And to be a water leader, perhaps consider looking at all lenses, your social, environmental lenses, and then your economic lens, as well as kind of integrating the community lens to it, as well as the scientific, engineering, economic, legal, health, and political. There are so many different areas that feed into water and really influence it. So to be a water leader, I think it's helpful to have every aspect or know of a little bit of every aspect of that.
That is a very interesting perspective, like seeing water from a holistical point of view. Kendra, do you have anything else to add?
I think be multidisciplinary. Penn has so many different areas to learn. Take a class at Wharton, take a class in the legal department, take a class in the engineering department, take a class in most of you are probably studying environmental science, but the more context, like Vivian was saying, the different perspectives you can learn, all of it has a place in the water industry, because water touches every aspect of life.
I also see from each of your career paths that networking, internships, and even volunteering have been very special, important shifts in your career. And as Margaret said, like this has to be seen from a holistical point of view. So I will say that volunteering with communities to see the social perspective, and but also looking from different angles, like the policy view and the scientific view is also very important. What do you think about what is the area of innovation within the water and environmental sector that excites you the most nowadays? And Kendra, we can start with you.
The water industry is extremely fragmented, right? Like there's 50,000 individual drinking water systems across the United States. And if each of them approach innovation, digital technologies separately, it's going to be a nightmare. So finding a way to deploy technology across cities, across utilities that can be at scale, to me, is the most important thing. It's going to have the biggest impact. I think the water industry is at the earliest possible stages of innovation for good reason, right? It's public health that you're talking about. So it requires quite a bit of, checking, making sure that whatever innovation you're putting in isn't going to harm public health. So I understand why, knowing that, understanding that, and then helping to promote the technology and innovation that's going to be able to come to scale is, to me, the most important thing. Otherwise, you're just chasing your tail in lots of different areas.
Yeah, very interesting point. Moret, what is your insight about this question?
Yeah, so especially at my job, I have the awesome opportunity to explore different incredible innovations in the water sector. We even have a separate chat at my company where we add the innovations that we find as they come. And because water, it's very new in the innovation phase, there is so much potential. So anything from UV LED at a large scale to PFAS destruction to atmospheric water generation really gives me a lot of hope and is really interesting to look into.
Vivian, and what do you think about what is exciting for you in the sector these days?
Individual technology wise, some of the ones that Mairead mentioned are fascinating to me, like the atmospheric water harvesting. They can do this now with gels. They can have it released very easily with a temperature gradient. That kind of thing is incredible. And when you work at Princeton, you've got all these mad geniuses coming up with ideas one at a time. But I'm going to kind of dovetail off what both the other speakers already said, because it was smart and connected. I think getting those products out of the lab, commercialized, and kind of integrating at scale is going to be so challenging and really important given the pace of the problems we're facing, like climate change. We have to do things now in unprecedented speed and scale. It's kind of terrifying. It's not without hope, but it's terrifying. So yeah, I think it's going to be a team effort and a heavy lift, but doable.
It's very interesting that all of you have touched the innovation piece. For me, for instance, I'm more working with different innovative methodologies and frameworks that are very aligned with the Convention of Biological Diversity. And one of the topics that really touches is water quality and water quantity. So for me, it is really exciting to see how the companies are starting to implement these methodologies in order to understand better what is the relationship with water. And it's very aligned with what you guys said about innovation in technology and how to scale it up, because thanks to these frameworks and methodologies, we are starting to see a greater acceptance of a higher adoption of technologies. So my next question, it is very, I will say, relate with what your organization does. So how does water impact the work that your organization does? And Moret, you can start first.
Yeah, so water is central to our business and the reason our business exists, actually. So Amon Advisors was founded as a consulting firm with expertise in the water sector. All of the founding partners were from the water sector. Now we have a majority of our partners still in the water sector, but because we're expanding, there's more experience in resource recovery or finance. But our job is to advise companies on water. So we also realize that the interconnectedness of the water sector and how much it flows into every other aspect. So, building on that resource recovery and reuse. And we're finding a lot of different companies now that were not initially interested in water or didn't even think about it, are now coming to us and trying to consider, the water risk that they have and their impact. So it's a really interesting space to be in.
Is Vivian and Kendra having the same raising interest in their own work? There are more stakeholders that are interested in knowing more about water risks. I'm open the floor right now. So any of you can.
I agree with that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, right now I'm at an energy institute. So we do energy and the environment. So water falls in the and the environment piece. But water energy nexus is huge anywhere, including at Princeton. And yeah, the stakeholder piece, that's been my whole job. So
Veolia is a very interesting company. It's global, and the company has defined its purpose, and its purpose is to be the champion of ecological transformation. No one really knows what that means, which I love, because it means something different for every city and every stakeholder. To a lot of people in Europe, ecological transformation is decarbonization. It is the water energy nexus. It is reducing the amount of energy that is required to clean water, to reuse water, to collect waste, to recycle. I mean, you can spread it all across. I think in the US, there's the cost of energy is really what drives reduction of energy usage. There's a lot of areas like specific stakeholders that care about water energy nexus by saving the energy, saving electricity, and reducing the carbon footprint. But I would argue that the majority of people who are running water systems are not motivated by protecting the environment and reducing carbon footprint. They're more motivated by the dollars at the end of the day. It's just the reality of the situation. So always acknowledge reality, embrace it, find a solution, right? So to me, the water energy nexus, I have to be careful about how I frame that to people, and I put it into words that most resonates with their drivers. And at the end of the day, if it reduces energy, fantastic, it's a win-win, and it reduces costs for you, great. So I say the topic is out there, but depending on which stakeholder group you're talking to, they're going to be motivated by different reasons for wanting to reduce energy.
Kendra, I have a question for you. Is that allowed? I hope that's allowed.
Totally. Go ahead.
I had heard coming up that there's sometimes perverse incentives for water use where, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard that at some point, I think in the Philadelphia area, when folks tried to save water and conserve by turning off the tap, rates went up so that the water company was still making enough to provide services to everybody.
Well, so I have the pleasure of understanding what goes into running like a drinking water system and a distribution system, the piping network. The largest cost is labor and jobs. If you go speak to people who are working in this field, this is a blue collar field for the most part. It's a blue collar field, and these are mostly, not always, mostly union jobs. And they have defined rates, defined labor rates that they get paid. And so if it's a very interesting space to be in, to say we want to conserve water, but yet the people who are trying to earn a living wage, right, for their job, they need to get paid the same amount. And then some people even argue, well, you really want people who are motivated to be running your drinking water system, right? You don't want them to cut corners. So you want to make sure they get a living wage and they feel like they're paid for the profession that they're pursuing diligently and responsibly. So yeah, it's an odd thing to say, yeah, we want you to conserve water, but we still need to earn the same amount of money to pay the people the jobs. I don't have an answer.
Complicated.
It's very complicated. It's never easy. Yeah. And the people who work in the water industry, the vast majority really care about their job. They're very passionate about it. And the second thing I'd say is that across the board, across every city in the United States, most have not invested in fixing the pipes that are underground. And these pipes are old and they leak water all over the place. Sewer pipes too, they leak sewage into the ground, and that costs so much money to dig that pipe up, to reline it or to replace that pipe, you're talking tens and millions, billions of dollars. That costs a lot of money and nobody has paid for it over the last 10 years. And oops, all of a sudden now that price is really, really high. So that's another thing that goes into water and sewer rates that people don't appreciate. So even if you're saving water, well, you know what, that maintenance repair cost is still there.
That is something that I didn't know, by the way. So thank you. Thank you for that explanation. I would like to ask a question from the audience, and please, if anyone wants to ask any questions, they can drop them in the chat box. So this question is, it says, the private water industry is very fragmented and there is not a ton of investment within the space. As a result, there is not always clear career paths for non-engineers within this space. What career advice do you have for people looking to create a career in water? Who wants to add?
I can start. I am also not an engineer and I work with mostly engineers, and people always ask me, are you an engineer? And I say, no, I'm a city planner with pride. That's what I go back to my first comment, be multidisciplinary, right? Business development is one area that's easier to get into the water space because business development requires you to take a multidisciplinary approach to anything and combine it all together into a little package. So legal and pricing and people and staffing and just common sense. So that's one area you can get into. And the way to enter business development is just to look for business development jobs in water companies. Could be in the technology space for water companies. It could be the operations space, like a utility. Policy work is big in the water space. A lot of people enter it in the policy. It could be a nonprofit. It could be an industry group. That is a really good avenue to get into. It could be consulting. I think a lot of consultants are also not engineers.
Can say to that the people I work with, they come from very different backgrounds. I personally come from the business background. I'm doing a carbon footprint all day long, biodiversity, water assessments across the supply chain. I have even teammates that they have careers in anthropology. Because the community and the social aspect of what we do, it is extremely important too. And probably Maureen has the same kind of insight, right, Maureen?
I was going to say the same. Yeah, no engineering background. So when I was looking at jobs, I was trying to find that. And I agree that it can be challenging to find something that's non-engineering in water, but there are some really cool companies, a lot of startups right now. There is for sales jobs or business development, as Kendra said, a satellite company that they were looking to sell their satellite where they could detect water underneath the ground. There is a company that does individual like lead testing kits that they send out to communities or individuals if they want. There's just a plethora of jobs out there. If you just have to look, it's outside of your standard water companies or even within the standards, but they do exist, I promise. But consulting is also a really good avenue, and you can really gain a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with both what Mairead and Kendra said. I've done all the jobs that you guys mentioned are like possible ways in, right? I'm not an engineer, clearly, but I work with engineers every single day. And I've been the consultant, I've done the sales, I've done the nonprofit and the policy. And I think those skills are really valuable. So I wouldn't undersell yourself if you are not an engineer. I think that those are complementing things. Engineers need non-engineers every single day. And I'll add that people could be a really good resource. They were for me. People like Joanne Spigonardo, who seem to know everybody and are consummate connectors and networkers. They are a great first stop. And then you can have informational interviews, coffee, conversations, pick the brains of people out there in the water industry. And not only will you learn about what they do, because people like to talk about what they do, clearly, but then they'll keep you in mind, they'll remember you. And if you ever apply for a job, they'll recognize that, and your application will stand out because of that. So as many conversations as you can have out there to learn things and get to know people, I think it can only serve you.
Yeah, I did an informational interview with Vivian, actually, and and a few other that Joanne recommended. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and then you pay it forward, right? Every new class, every new cohort pays it forward to the next one.
Informational interviews are really important. And you cannot imagine the amount of people that are willing to help you out. Like you can go into LinkedIn and ask for these interviews. That will be a very easy venue to see the other people's career profiles and reach out to them. And you can be surprised about how many people answer and are willing to sit down with you and discuss your their career paths. Well, I don't see more questions in the chat box. So I do have a question that I would like everybody to think about and reflect is what is the number one thing we can do to conserve or protect water? So in my case, for instance, I can go to the basics. Just don't fall in the tragedy of the commons. Water is a public common resource. Also, that doesn't mean that cannot be depleted. So we have to be very conscious about its use. And here in New Jersey, we have plenty of water, but still be conscious about its use, raise awareness about resource consumption, and that will be my main advice. What about you, Vivian?
I think a career in water can go pretty far. I think just kind of dedicating your work life to that is a critical step, because especially folks like us who have the privilege to come out of a school like Penn, we've got a lot to offer and we can make a dent. And so if all of us contribute some or all of our career to water, or our, you know, I have very little time for extracurriculars now that I have kids, but the ones that I'm most passionate in and still invest in all have to do with water and environment. So I think that goes a really long way.
I'd say to conserve water, one thing you can also do is just as you buy products, not water products, anything, clothes, toys, reduce the packaging. Don't buy stuff that comes with an incredible amount of waste in packaging, because water goes into production of whatever is, goods you're buying. And at the same time, water is used on the back end for if it's recycling or whatever it might be. So I think that's a different way of looking at conserving water in the water cycle that we don't always see front and center. And I think protecting water for those people who have lawns, don't use pesticides, don't use fertilizers. This is a uncommonly known fact that, the extra fertilizers you put onto your grass or during a rainstorm are going to wash away, and they're going to go into a nearby stream, and they're going to have a negative impact on the ecosystem of your communities. And so, start trying to protect your local waterways by starting with your own home, your own property.
I was also going to say something. Sorry to butt in, but basically everything everyone else said, use less. But one thing that I have been doing, because I didn't realize how much water is being used in eating meat. So be vegan for a day, 1 day a week. Be vegan. It's helpful, and it makes a huge impact in preserving water.
Diana, you probably already saw it. There's another question in the chat, the Q&A.
But no, I don't see it. Oh yeah, I see it here. But first of all, I would like to pass it on to Moret. She didn't have the opportunity to answer to the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll echo everyone else, but to be an advocate is a thing as well, and be conscious about its use. So even in your community, if you see a leaking hydrant, one time I was walking home at night and I saw just this massive leak and all this water coming from the hydrant. So, I called the local water authority, and it's just, be aware, be conscious. That's not going to happen every day, hopefully, but just be a good advocate.
That's a very good advice. Okay, I will ask this other question from the audience. Are there any groups you recommend attending events or joining for the purposes of networking in the Philadelphia area?
Many. Well, the Water Center is prominently featured today and should definitely be on people's minds. It's at Penn, but it does a lot of work beyond Penn. It's a great organization and a partner of the Global Water Alliance, which I mentioned before. It's another great nonprofit based in Philadelphia, but doing projects, education, and advocacy globally. And these two groups in particular are surprisingly easy to get into. It's not, they are open and full of lovely people, some of whom are, I think, on this call today. But these are the doers. These are the folks that are out and about talking to people, taking on the projects, taking on the work. And I'm sure Joanne has a list a mile long of other organizations in the area.
Well, I can chime in. The Water Reuse Association is a wonderful association to be a member of. They have student memberships. They have, new memberships, and it's very affordable. Obviously, there's something like 21 plus centers and initiatives at Penn that deal in sustainability. One is the Wharton ESG initiative, which is huge, wonderful initiative to get involved with. The Climate Center for Energy Policy. It all leads to water. These titles may sound like they're not about water, but everything's about water, especially today, everything's about water. But there are many, many initiatives and centers at Penn that work in sustainability, but the Water Center would love to have you involved. Anybody that's on this call, just get in touch and we will work together, we'll collaborate with you.
I would also say that earlier this year, it was the UN Water Conference in New York City, and there are plenty of organizations that they send delegates to this great event, and it is a great opportunity to join one of these organizations, including the University of Pennsylvania sent a couple of delegates over. And it is a great opportunity to know firsthand what policies are being under discussion for all the nations. Yeah, so that would be a good way to go to.
I know when I was searching for jobs, I had a Google alert for water conferences that I would just show up to, where I would volunteer or find some way to be involved. So Mazars Women in Water, they had a conference in DC pre-pandemic. I don't know if they still do it, but be proactive about the conferences you go to and try and network. And I met some wonderful people there. The Ocean Exchange is one that we work with. You can volunteer. The Stockholm World Water Week, you can volunteer with them. Of course, you'll probably have to buy a flight on top of that. But yeah, there's a lot of different conferences if you search, and you can volunteer.
So if there is any more questions, you already have the opportunity to put it in the chat box. I just wanted to highlight as well something that we have talked about it, but in a very high level. It is about the relationship of water with community. Water also provides cultural services. It plays an important role in every civilization, right, and society from the cultural and heritage point of view. And that, I think, is as well one of the ways we are trying to create that emotional connection with water and trying to companies understand that they can become water stewards in the locations where they operate. And that is as well a great idea for students that they want to become involved in water-related topics, because they have so much power that they can use in the communities where they live. They can help to protect and restore critical habitats. They can create environmental programs in their communities to raise awareness about water issues in the area. And that was a capstone project that I recently read from one of our one of the students that graduated this year at the master's program in environmental studies. She created a beautiful educational program about how to protect the Delaware the Delaware River. Yeah, so that is a very important piece that we also have to take into consideration, how to protect water in our communities, because that will be our first step, the step we are more emotionally connected with. So as there is no more questions, I will just wrap up the call. I would like to give a special thanks to all the speakers, to Joanne for being the mastermind behind the organization of this event, and to put us in contact with students, that they are probably interested, and we will see them perhaps, I hope, in the water industry in the future. So thank you everybody for attending this session, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.